Thank you so much for joining us at the Aurora Institute Symposium All Fall webinar on integrating project-based learning and online and blended courses in Indiana. We're so grateful you could join us today. My name is Natalie Slocum. I'm the Strategic Partnerships Director here at the Aurora Institute. And before I turn it over to our esteemed panelists today, I have just a few items to quickly go over. As you probably have already heard, we made the very difficult decision to shift our symposium this year from an in-person convening to a virtual event, which will still occur on October 26th through the 28th. So please continue to save the date. But in addition to that, we're hosting a series of all fall webinars leading up to the main event and following the main event, which we've been running from August all the way through November. And today's webinar is part of that series. And it's really designed to tackle some tough issues that the field is facing. So we're so glad you could join us today, and we hope you check out our website and register for other webinars that are upcoming over the next few months. And before I turn it over to our colleagues, I have just a few quick housekeeping items to go over. I invite you to please introduce yourself in the chat box. We would really love to know who you are, where you're tuning in from, and perhaps share with us one hope that you have for this school year. We also invite you to ask questions using the chat box. We encourage a really rich dialogue, and if you have resources to share or insights from your own experiences, we really love to hear those too. And we'll be saving time for questions, so feel free to pose those to our panelists, and we'll do our very best to address those. We also welcome you to share what you're learning on social media using hashtag Aurora 2020 and tagging us at Aurora_INST. And today's webinar is being recorded and it will be archived on our website. So you'll be able to refer back to this full recording and you'll have access to the slide deck as well. And we'll email those links to you all in the upcoming days. And with that, I am so honored to now turn it over to Dr. Ernest to get us started today. Dr. Ernest, it's all you.
Thank you, Natalie. I appreciate that. And, you know, this first slide kind of encompasses, you said, tell us what we really want to accomplish or what we see. So I never want us to ask people things that I'm not willing to do myself. And I think this first slide encompasses, when you think about the title that we had was integrating project-based learning and online online and blended courses. I think for me, it also becomes about what we've kind of subtitled what we work on here is high impact classroom strategies for deep, meaningful, innovative, and relative learning in online, in-person, or blended. And I think we say all three of those because we have schools that are in any one of those or all three of those at the same time, right? And so it becomes, for me, it continues to become around about not maybe just saying that we're doing the best we can, given the times that we're in, but that our students deserve for us to be doing a really good job in these times. So it's really, really exciting for us to be with you today and going through this. So with this next slide, we've got the three of us who will be presenting to you this afternoon. And as Natalie said, I am Byron Ernest, and I live in Indiana. I work for Noble Education Initiative and do professional development, consulting, and really even things that where we do individualized needs for schools and in the work that we do. So in my work, I get to go to lots of different states, work with teachers in lots of different states and internationally. So I'm super excited to be working through this today as we go. And so I'll let my colleagues jump on and introduce themselves. Lauren, you want to go next?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lauren Bailey. I am from, sorry, we're figuring out which one of us in this room needs to get muted. You got it?
You want to come to my computer?
No, you need. Sorry. Lauren Bailey from Northern Indiana. I am a blended learning coordinator for a small district in Amish country at the very tip top of Indiana. And I'm excited to share with you what my students have been doing with some project-based learning in the online environment. We have a blended learning program that I run and about 1,200 courses that we're overseeing in our little district right now. And we had a pretty good transition when everything went COVID-y. And so I'm excited to share how we managed to get some of this project-based learning as a part of that online stuff.
Thank you, Lauren. Next, we've got Sarah Kuntz. Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Kuntz from Horizon Education Alliance in Elkhart, Indiana. And I'm a project manager, and I help manage different initiatives that support students in exploring different career pathways. At HEA, we partner with businesses, schools, and community stakeholders, and we develop initiatives and test and run these so that we can provide solutions to improve our local education. So we are an intermediary between those and have been having a great time, especially working with Lauren and Dr. Ernest as he did our professional development last year.
All right, thank you very much. So let's just dive into this. And one of the things that we would like to do, and we start this on the next slide here with the question of why do we need high impact strategies? And so I know we have individuals on here from lots of different backgrounds, different things that you do, different things that you teach, and policymakers and those kinds of things. And so we wanted to start out with a chance for you just to have some personal interaction in a small group. So we are going to put you into small groups for about 7 minutes here, about 7 minutes in small groups. Would love to have you have a discussion about why do we need high impact strategies, and even maybe what are some of those and what are the challenges of getting those in place. And so if you would do a couple of things when you go to your small group. One, have someone keep track of which group you're in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that kind of thing. And then maybe have someone voluntold to be the one to share out. And we probably won't have enough time for every group to share out, but we would love to hear a few groups share out with whatever time will allow. So with that, if Natalie and crew could put us into small groups here for 7 minutes, greatly appreciated. See you on the other end. Keep track of what group you're in and have someone ready to share out.
Okay, you should be in your groups in just a minute.
All right, I'll give it a second here. I don't know, it always takes a second for people to get back in. We don't quite have all the participants back in yet, so we'll give it just a second here. Welcome back to all. Looks like we're getting a bunch loaded in here. We'll give it just a second. I've learned my lesson. I always get in trouble for going ahead and start sharing out before everybody gets back in. Then I have people getting on to me that they've missed something. So I'll give it just a second here to get a few more in here. All right. So if I could just have someone, and Natalie, I'm assuming that someone could grab the mic if they would like to and share out. Do we have that possibility for them?
Yes, you are correct. So
Okay.
if anybody wants to speak, they can find their own name on the participant list and just unmute themselves and go ahead and talk that way.
So I'll go first.
Great.
So we talked about how traditionally, the whole reason we need alternative schools is because traditional education has not worked for at-risk students. Also, another member brought up that last spring was such a disaster that we need to seize the moment in offering more relevant, more meaningful learning for students who were very disillusioned with what happened last spring and possibly how this fall has started as well. We talked about students needing more voice and choice and more meaningful and relevant projects that have a long-term reason to do them, a reason to share them with stakeholders and things like that. Yeah, so those were our main points.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. And I'm loving where you went, because voice and choice is you're gonna find that on a, I was telling my group that we're gonna use puzzle pieces in a little bit as a metaphor, and voice and choice is a puzzle piece as well as relevant learning. So excited to be able to talk about that. So that's exciting. Do I have another group that would like to go?
Hi, this is Greg Brown. I was with group 5, and Joe and I had a great discussion about the importance here. I mean, because it's so impactful, the type of learning students. I come from an environment where we're focused on career paths, and the application of this kind of learning to resume-worthy type of experiences are so key. Another participant, Joe, is focused on her school's online school, and very focused on the mathematics being another area where we need to encourage this kind of learning, because it's, almost every other experience we have is going to be, using mathematics in some way. So that's kind of how we contributed to the identifying the importance, the impact of strategies.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. And I love the way you put that resume worthy experiences, right? That I like to talk a lot about outcomes and where are outcomes with students, and resume worthy is really how we need to be looking at that in a lot of cases. Thank you very much. Do I have one more group that would like to go? One more group. If we don't, that's okay too. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to that next slide, which just ties together some of the things that we think about here. What's the goal of the high impact classroom strategies? And again, I think it was said best that we're giving student with your groups with voice and choice, the relevant learning, the resume worthy experiences, and that's what we're really shooting for as we look at this and we work through all this. And one of the things that we talked about when we were putting forth what we wanted to do for this presentation to Aurora, we had put in there that there's been some research done, and in fact I did some of this research, as to what bringing a relevant context brings to our students. And so I want to spend just a few minutes, and I'm not going to spend very long on this, but I think it's important to point out the fact that if we use these project-based learning strategies, that it can have a huge impact on our students. And in our group, I was in group 1, and I know it was talked about in there about how our students really do deserve these strategies right now. And particularly when we look at, and it was mentioned again in the share out here, that we didn't get it always right in the spring, and we have a lot of work to do, and we owe it to our students to make sure that we're doing it in the spring. And so when we take a look at in this next slide, this is where I would love to just give you a few slides of what the research that I was able to do in teaching students in a relevant context of agriculture. So next slide, please. So what we did, what I did was in this was really ask 3 research questions. And these 3 research questions really came out to show us some statistically significant correlation. And in this first slide that we have here, this was the first research question that we asked. And this was researching 486 students. So we did use a pretty good sized N number when we looked at this. And what our question here was, is there a significant relationship between successful completion of the high school course Fundamentals of Agriculture Science, and that was our independent variable, and student achievement as measured by the Indiana Biology 1 end of course percentage score? And you can see there with a points by serial correlation that with 0.364, there was a significant relationship between those students who had taken that. And we would argue that that relationship was because our students were working in a highly relevant context. In fact, actually, in some cases, doing research for a seed company that was world-based in the city where my school was in Lebanon, Indiana. And so we saw that statistical advantage to our students who had taken that course. Next slide, please. For the second research question, and I always like to show this one as well. So for this one, it was there a relationship between that score and between the passing and taking the end of the Fundamentals of Agriculture Science course, and you can see here again that statistical significance that we had there with this, and that's again because we believe, because of the fact that the students were being taught in a relevant context, and they had voice and agency within what they were doing. And so next slide, please. And these next 2 slides for research question 3, again, this was where we were comparing the actual score within the ECA as well as taking the course. And for those of you, if you go to the next slide, this is the one I like to show, because anyone who has ever done some research and work with a chi-square type significance, 10.082, that's pretty huge. And so we found that, again, those students taught in that relevant context really made a difference. And so you will hear us today, and you'll hear that come out in the presentations when we start to look at some of the specific puzzle pieces and some of those high impact strategies that you can use. You'll see that come out in this, where we talk about that impact of that relevance for for education. So again, happy to at any point in time, and I'll try to watch the chat if anybody's got any questions. I didn't want to just spend a lot of time on research. For sometimes people get real excited about that, other people don't. But I did want to show you that there really is some research that's been done out there, and I can point to others as well, where doing this kind of work for students really does make a difference in their performance and achievement, really in lots of different ways that you can measure that. So that really gets exciting when you think about it. And so this next slide just talks about some interpretation of results, and I think we can relate this to some of the things that we've talked about here so far. And again, just that statistical significance and that piece that's relevant to them. And I love to point out this picture over to the right on this slide, and it says sweet corn for sale. And I love to tell this story because another piece that we did in order to give students voice and agency and to bring relevancy of learning, we have and we still have it. I'm not at that school anymore, but we established an agronomy farm. And so part of that farm, we actually turned over to the students each year to do what they wanted to do. They would need to do the chemistry and things for the soil testing and all of those things, but then they determined what they wanted to raise and what they wanted to do. And I love this picture because this group that year determined that they wanted to do sweet corn, and they raised one heck of a crop of sweet corn and made our FFA chapter some of the most money that it ever made off of that. And they learned so much from that, whether it was business skills, the science skills, and what have you. So those kinds of things can certainly happen and be worthwhile. And so with the next slide that we've got, and I like to point this out just as a guide for us to think about. I use this a lot when I'm working with teachers and we think about how do we engage students and how do we work through this. And I love this graph that was put together by the International Center for Leadership and Education. And it's really a knowledge taxonomy, if you will. And when you think about acquisition of knowledge, application, assimilation, but where we really want to get to is that area in that upper right-hand quadrant. Can we get students to adapt? And I would argue that when we can get to that quadrant, then we've begun to get those resume-worthy experiences that were talked about. And that becomes really, really exciting when we begin to see our students working with, as it says there, applying real-world predictable situations as well as the unpredictable situations. We've got kids doing real things, and you're going to hear about that as we go through as well. Next slide. And so what happens if we get them up there into that adaptation? We get motivated students. Their creativity begins to blossom. They're innovative. They're solving problems. And it's all because they understand the why behind that. Why am I learning? And I was that kid. And as you saw on that one slide, the book I wrote on this, I called The Hand in the Back of the Room, because I was that hand in the back of the room. If you couldn't tell me why I needed to learn it, you were going to have trouble with me learning it. And I think that goes for a lot of our students. And so they need to understand that relevant piece of that. So with that, we need to, with this next slide, want to think a little bit about both rigor and relevance, and both of these things are important. And I would love to have, if I could get two people just to, and we always kind of need to norm these two definitions to really, for them to make any sense. Could I get two people, and you could also chat this, but would love to have two people grab the mic and tell us what your definition of rigor would be. Could I get two people to do that, please? Do I have any takers? 2 people who would be willing to take the mic. And I've got in the chat, I've got Rigor, the level of challenge. How about it? Do I have anyone who would want to chat relevance, what that means to you?
Brian, I'd be happy to add my comments on relevant and rigor too.
Please, Greg, that'd be awesome.
I mean, relevance, I mentioned before, we're career focused. So, a lot of this has to be present outcomes that have a market basis, right? That students can take something with them, whether it's their next step in their education or some form of employment, right? So I think the relevance piece is extremely significant along those lines. It could be the academic path, continuing with education, or intermediate service, the job or even military. Going back to rigor though, the degree of stress, and I mean that in a good way, not distress, but stress, right, will reinforce this learning lessons and it'll support that relevancy, right? I mean, they're learning things that will be applicable, that will be needed in that marketplace. Those are how those two mean what they mean to us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you getting on. If we could go to the next slide, and I always like to share where we're coming from our end as we make this presentation and we take a look at this is, and I love this definition of rigor by Briggs. It to me, it encompasses a lot there. Rigor doesn't simply mean giving students more and harder work, and I think sometimes people do that, and that really wasn't what that means. But instead, the result of the work challenges the students' thinking in new and interesting ways, and I think that was a lot of what Greg was saying there as well. And then the relevant piece, and yes, I did quote myself there, but I think there it becomes, are we using context in which the students really understand why they're learning there? To me, that's the part about relevant that makes a whole lot more sense if we're able to do that. And that was really what, again, Greg was saying, and I appreciate him jumping in and sharing with that. Next slide, please. So with that, if we can put this whole puzzle together, where do we start? And that becomes those things of how do we integrate project-based learning into all the different facets, again, whether that's blended, online, and you're going to hear different pieces to that. Next slide. We really have 4 corner pieces, and the 4 corner pieces are what we're focusing on today, are these four corners here: real world and relevant, collaborative learning, feedback, and student choice and agency. Those are the 4 corner points, that corner posts or corner pieces that we're going to deal with. And at any point in time, if you want to bring up others that you think fit into this is really, really important as well. Next slide. And so to do this, I want to introduce Sarah back to take the microphone, and she's going to share out a little bit, because one of the things that we wanted to make sure for you all was for you all to see what I consider a best practice that has been happening within our state in Indiana. And I know other states have been doing this too, but I wanted to have you have the chance to really get exposed to a person here who's doing this work with Horizon Education Alliance in Indiana, who actually are bringing together the businesses and industry and the schools. And as Sarah said, she's had the chance, we've got the chance to meet each other because I've done some professional development for their teachers for them. And that's been very, very exciting. But I think one best practice that we certainly want to have everyone take away, if you're not doing this in areas, is it really is so important to have a group who really is serving as that conduit between business, industry, between the schools and really helping them guide them through. And I know that's even been a blessing when you think about the 189 days, I believe it is, that we've now been in a global pandemic, as to help still make those connections with the students. So with that, Sarah, would love to hear you talk a little bit about that connection, and then we'll get into some of these puzzle pieces.
Yes, thanks, Byron. So HEA, as I said earlier, is an intermediary between businesses and schools in Elkhart County. We work with all of our schools in Elkhart County, so there are 7 school districts, and we support them in different ways, from newborn babies all the way up to even have an adult pathways side where we support apprenticeships, all education supporting the lifelong learning. So here, mine just got blurry. So if you look on here, we've been doing the business education roundtables for 6 years. And this started actually back at the recession is when HEA kind of formed out of that, because businesses and schools came together and said, what can we do as a community? How can we work together to help grow students so that we don't have this happen to our businesses? How can we work together to do that? So it started as calling roundtables because we had discussions around the table. But over the years, shapes look different each time. This past year was the most support we've had. So like I said earlier, there was professional development done with Dr. Byron Ernest. But we had businesses come. He trained them in an hour session, and then we had speed dating with the businesses. So I found businesses, teachers who were interested from the different districts, and kind of thought about needs that the teachers might have. But we decided, the teachers really need to determine who they want to work with to design a project. So we played around with this speed dating lunch session. They sat down with the business, ate together, asked questions. The business did list their needs. What's something we need? And so teachers were listening carefully to what are the needs they have, and how would that align with my standards? And then the businesses left, and our teachers had a chance to share and kind of battle it out for which business they would like to work with. And so they formed these partnerships. These partnerships, like we said, have been happening for 6 years in different ways, but with the professional development that was provided by Byron. And then I was able to go into the schools. And then I was also the person who was working with the businesses because they speak different languages. Schools and businesses speak different languages. They work differently. They have different ideas of how things go. And so our role at HEA was really to make sure those relationships kept going well, and that teachers felt support from the businesses, and the businesses also felt support from the teachers. So throughout the whole year, teachers were developing a project. They all had a driving question that was based off of that business, and then ended in student products at the end with presentations. I will say that with COVID, some had waited until spring to do their projects, and feeling overwhelmed, some did cut that off. However, you will hear from several teachers today about some of the successes and some of those things that Byron already talked about, that things that went really well for them. And then Lauren is going to share in a little bit about her classroom with blended learning, because I know many of you are here today wondering, how can we make this work in an online world? So I think that, yeah, this opportunity to have a business partner, even if you can't do a full-blown project, is so valuable to students to have that real-world connection. And I did put a little note here. Are there questions that you have about how those partnerships were developed and how we ran those sessions with teachers? You can put them in the chat or ask out loud. I think I'm okay with that. And if you want to go to the next slide, if people have questions, I'll answer them. So this just shows you some of our partnerships. We had about 50 teachers participate this year. So we had 50 businesses across Elkhart County who partnered with them. So this is just a few examples of the different types, everywhere from manufacturers to a small little coffee shop, to some nonprofits in the area. So lots of different opportunities and ways for students to learn about their community and how they can support their community. Don't see any questions, but feel free to add those to the chat and we can answer them as we go out, as we move through here. There is
And
one.
Sarah, Susan Davies put in here that she loves the format for this, having a wide range of businesses promotes student choices. So also, if anybody has any questions about the format, please make sure to chat those in. Sarah can answer them either by the chat or in person. So thanks for interacting there, Susan.
And I did think like this could be done virtually, even if you don't have an intermediary like HEA. If you have some, I think you could do it on a Zoom and invite a bunch of businesses to that Zoom and have teachers listen in, and the businesses go around and share what they're struggling with, what their needs are, and schools can share what they're struggling with. And there might be some partnerships that naturally come out of that. They wouldn't have the classroom support, but I think it would be motivating just to have that partnership with the business. And I think some of these other questions will get answered as we go along. So let's go ahead and move into the next section where teachers are going to get a chance to share. And we do have actually a business that will get to share their experience as well. So Byron, you want to enter into this?
Sure.
Now? This says the fourth corner. This actually got switched around. So this is the first corner.
Yeah, so this says, for those of you that think, gosh, you all are crazy, it's the fourth corner. We actually made this switch because of students, and because of, and we needed to have the students on at this time here at the school. So we made a switch around. We're going to the fourth corner, and really, you know, as my mama always taught me, you use the corners to put a puzzle together. And so really it doesn't matter what order they're in, as long as we get the corner pieces in place. That's the foundation for the puzzle. So with that, next slide here, we're going to talk.
Dr. Ernest.
What's that?
Sabrina is stepping out of class, Mrs. Hayden. So if you go one more slide, please, we're gonna go ahead and switch to real world and relevance so Miss Hayden can get back to her class. If you want to, can you get your brain in?
You know what, I can be, I am like Gumby today and can be flexible, okay? There's a quote for you. I'm like Gumby today. So let's be flexible and go to the first corner. Again, not necessarily any more important, but it was the first one that we listed, and that was being real world and relevant. So next slide, please. With that, we've got, and I'm super excited for you to be able to hear from this teacher, Sabrina Hayden, and you'll notice there, this is her with some students in the picture, and I'm interviewing them. At that time, her students are talking about the real world and relevant part. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina to talk about what her project was and those kinds of things, and maybe we can ask her a few questions along the way, but we've asked her to really address the real world and relevant side of what they've done using project-based learning strategies. So with that, Sabrina.
Hi. Sorry guys, I'm supposed to be giving a test right now, so I have to be a little quieter while they're studying. So my real world and relevant project, my project was, we worked with the Teachers Credit Union here in local Elkhart County, and they were really wanting to set up a project where they were trying to get kids in to do their kind of money matters learning and really joining their credit union and learning more about managing their money. So our project was how to market to those teenagers and students like them. So for my kiddos, they obviously are teenagers and learning about money and how to manage money. So they were really in charge of, they looked at a current program that the credit union had already available to students, and they analyzed it and kind of went through it, thought about how it was helpful, how it was not helpful, how boring it was, how not boring it was, what incentives and things like that. So they gave them that feedback, but then they also came up with different projects. Each group, they broke into groups, came up with some sort of marketing project on how they would market to other teenagers. Sorry, just a moment. Please pardon the interruption. Can all of you move? We're also in the middle of pictures, sorry. So their projects where they each chose some way to market to other students and how to get them to actually come in. So in this picture, this was actually our group that won the project, we made it into a competition. And so each group presented their project and their ideas to Teachers Credit Union, and Teachers Credit Union chose like a group that really exemplified what they were looking for and what could actually help. So this group actually designed an entirely new Money Matters app for them and things like that. And so that they were really impressed with. So the young lady in the dress, Callie, actually is now going into marketing after this project to follow as a career path.
And Sabrina, had she not, she did not think, was that not what she wanted to go into till she did this project? So it actually even served as a career?
Correct, right. That
okay.
Marketing was never on her radar to even follow. And so once we started this project and they were going through that process, she really found that she enjoyed it. And so that is what her career path is now. That's what she's going to go to school for.
Okay. And Sabrina, what, can you speak a little bit to the, clearly this was a marketing project, and that, what would be some of the standards that you were able to teach in really a real world and relevant manner? And I'm not asking you to list them all, because clearly you'd say, gosh, I'm going to forget some, but can you give a few, and can you give how teaching in that way impacted the students in terms of what they're learning, their attitude toward learning, and that?
So for me, because it is an English class, I really heavily relied on the research standards. And so the kids had to do some prior research on what is marketing and things like that, because marketing is not typically something that you would do in an English class. So we had them researching different marketing tools, what types of marketing are out there. And so that's where they kind of started. But then actually there are some now work ethic standards that also came into play. How were they able to work with a group? Were they each accountable within their group? And kind of managing their own time. I gave them complete control. I just gave them the timeline of, hey, we need to be finished by this date. Here's the date for presentations, and they really had to learn how to manage their own time within each class period. Some groups learned that they needed to work outside of the class. Some were able to accomplish everything they wanted to within the class, but using that time management skill was a big one for them, and just those initial research skills that they needed to be able to move forward with the project.
Awesome. And then one last question from me, and I'd love if anyone else has any questions for Sabrina while we have her. What, how are you doing something project-based now in the situation we're in? You clearly, this was a subject that you could have done in a virtual setting, because a marketing plan could be set up anywhere, right? So can you help our listeners because one of the things that we want to do with this webinar is talk about how do we do this in an online setting? Can you talk about how maybe you made some and I know you were really close to being finished up with this before the pandemic hit, but what would this look like during the pandemic?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think my students really would need to, that time management would have been a huge one, especially during the pandemic, just because I would not have been able to sit in a classroom with them. And I think also what helped was our partner was wonderful and actually did telephone conferencing with our students and when they came up with questions and things. And so I think that that is still very possible, especially with students are virtual, is setting up those phone conferences with their partners so that they can ask those questions to their partners. Also, maybe kind of breaking them into groups, I think would also be helpful. And that way kids don't feel like they're doing everything alone or feeling overwhelmed. And that way they have that sense of partnership with working on the project, which is possible. I know with breakout rooms and things like that, that they still have that time with their group that's not necessarily interrupted by others.
Awesome, thank you. And I know from having worked with other businesses up there, and I know we're going to hear this from another one later on, that they even talked about how it was even easier to communicate once the pandemic hit, because now it's almost like second nature for us to get on Zooms. And so it wasn't about trying to schedule a time for meetings. It almost got easier, so we can leverage the things that we've learned from the pandemic and continue to use those even when we go back into person. So Sarah, I know Sarah has some questions from some folks that she's been getting. Sarah, do you want to ask a few of those?
Yeah, so a few of the questions, they were just clarifying the roundtables and how they worked. One question was this a one-to-one partnership, like business with one teacher? We had a variety, so it was just one teacher, they only did one classroom and one business. Some teachers did one business, but they did it with all of their classes if they were middle school or high school. And then we also had some groups that they had 3 teachers, and Lauren was part of them, 3 different subjects, 3 different grade levels, and they all partnered with the same business and came together to do a project. So you can be really creative in how you partner with businesses. The other question was the length of the projects. So we gave them freedom in that. We didn't want it to be overwhelming as they were experimenting. So a project is making it real world and having that connection with the business. And so some that could have been 2 weeks. Some did it over the course of 3 months, and they would implement pieces along the way. Some saved it for the end as a review. So there wasn't like a set, how long could it be? Some were short, and some were able to incorporate it throughout their whole semester. And then the other one was how does student choice work? That doesn't happen with the business partnership, but you'll hear more about that and how that actually happens within the projects.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Sabrina, do you have anything else to add before we move on to our other puzzle piece?
I think she's back to giving her test.
All right. So with that, are we I'm trying to still act like Gumby and be flexible. Lauren, are we coming back to you with the 4th puzzle piece?
Yes, please.
All right, so let's back up, and you can go to the next slide because we've already talked student choice and agency, that's where we're going to be. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Lauren here, and she's going to work us through what they've been doing with that. Lauren, take it away.
Thanks. So our blended learning program is similar to other rural districts. We're borderline rural, but where you can't afford to have staff for all kinds of cool electives. So we have content for online electives. So today I have with me some of my middle school students that are taking online animal science, like a veterinary science class. Last year, they did the first semester of animal science with me, and we partnered with the Humane Society, go figure. And this year, for the second semester, we're working with a farm vet. So we're going to tell you all kinds of gross, cool stuff that they're learning about that's far more interesting than what they can read online on the computer. And we're doing it virtually. So we're going to tell you about some of their cool stuff. Girls, why don't you go ahead? Can one of you unmute yourself, and we'll see if we can talk in the same room? Lizzie, unmute. So the girls are here with me. And I'll ask them a few questions. The first question I would ask them is, These are middle school students, and they are working on a high school credit course. And on top of that, I am giving them this obnoxious project-based learning project. Like, I plan on making them work hard. It is not easy, lazy, credit recovery, This is hard stuff. So girls, could, just 1 second, Lizzie, could you tell them if I have added all kinds of stress to your life and you're miserable and you don't like doing this learning stuff?
You like doing the course. We like doing the course and we don't feel like it's like a whole bunch of extra work.
I'm gonna jump in here. So these students are superstars. They're also maybe some of my quieter students, but what they're saying is they like doing the course, and by adding all this extra work to their plates, they're not stressed, they're not heartbroken, and they're learning stuff that they're really excited about. They had choice in the course that they're taking as an elective, and they have choice in where we're driving the project to go. I had hoped to share with you today what our driving question for the semester is, but we don't know what it is yet. They're steering the ship, and they are so excited about where we are learning right now with the veterinarian. We talk to her once a week. Today she called us while she was on a farm drive and stuff was flying all over her truck and she was hitting potholes, and she was talking to us through all of their questions on the way. Last week for our meeting, she had her phone on a Zoom and she took us all through her new shop, and we got to see this beautiful new facility she built. I anticipate her sticking her arm inside of a cow and showing us that on camera. Last week after we hung up, she called me and said, "Have you ever seen an ear mite?" No, but she was really excited. She's going to get us some slides of things that we are going to look at under a microscope at school. And I could have never imagined how exciting ear mites are going to be, but it is so much cooler than the stuff they're reading online. Now they still got to do that stuff, and their learning and depth of knowledge right here is only increasing and being challenged, and their minds are growing, and they're learning more and more about the career and the content, and they're driving where this goes. So they presented a zillion questions. One of them's interested in being a vet that studies exotic animals. I would have never thought of such a thing. But so they're driving this bus right now. We're learning about her business, and our goal that we have on top of our shared document, this is how we kind of do it digitally. We have a shared document, and the goal is to establish a lifelong relationship with this veterinarian, because she will continue to support their learning and growth, give them opportunities for apprenticeships and internships and things as we move forward. And then we will have a driving question for the semester, and it'll be something to the effect of how we can support this veterinarian's new business. So we're learning about the challenges she has with stocking and inventory and staffing, which aren't textbook conversations, but we are going to find a way to support and learn, and they are going to get a real taste for what a farm veterinarian does, and if that's the direction they want their career path to go or not. I'm talking really fast, I do that. What else, Dr. Ernest?
Well, if we could get one of those students back up here, I would really like to hear from them as to this whole idea of they're learning virtually, and so they really have access to this veterinary, it sounds like 24/7, if you will, and so, but I'd love to hear from them what that's meant to be able to have that kind of access, that if we weren't using technology and weren't doing this from a virtual standpoint, we wouldn't be able to do. Can you have them speak to what that's like to be able to have that much access to a business person? Oh, I get to hear from Lainey. Okay, Lainey. Maybe not.
I thought it was pretty neat to talk with the veterinarian.
And you've been able to do that directly, right?
Yeah.
So can you give me
I think it's cool because we get to like learn about what she does, and we get to learn about what things she does with running a business.
So Lizzie, don't turn your mic off yet, Lizzie. Give us what's something that you've asked her or that you have learned about from a real life standpoint.
Well, we asked her like what something hard was, and she told us like doing like inventory with all the medicine and like how to kind of like separate it. And so I thought that was cool because usually we don't hear about that when you're reading like on the computer.
Can you talk about the advice she gave us on your schooling, different school choices she made, and how these hands-on experiences are important?
She was telling us about like different schools and how they have programs that are good for different things, and how it's really good to get a lot of experience.
Oh, so you even got to hear about the different schools that you would go to and the good things and bad things, because she's a person that's gone to school for that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. They've got a lot of information. First of all, she is like total woman power. So she is loving having these multiple girls at her disposal, and she is guiding them from all the mistakes that she made about her undergraduate schooling and fiddling around with one thing or another. And she is just telling them to get as many opportunities as they can right now to get their paws on animals. And that's what's truly going to help them get into veterinary school someday, not necessarily getting the straight A's. So, okay. Good advice from her.
That is awesome. And I love the fact that, and so I appreciate that, Lauren, and I appreciate your students being on here. And for me, this also becomes, and for those viewing, one other way that I think it becomes really, really important from a student agency and choice standpoint. And you heard Lauren say, they're steering the ship. The students are steering the ship. And the exciting part for me is they're learning to steer the ship from someone who's actually in this business. And I think that that's one of the things that that I love about project-based learning, is the fact that our students are learning from people who are actually in these businesses. They're not just teaching about it, they're in the business and actually then working with our students, which brings real world relevancy in, which we've talked about now as one of our corners, and also then the student choice and agency as to how they run that as well. So that gets very, very exciting. So now let's, I think we're going to need to skip through the real world and relevant slides again and come here to the next one for collaborative learning. And if you'll bump that one more time for me. So collaborative learning, and with this one we have a video, and I've not had a chance to check the participants. I think we might have Cindy Greider on with us for that, and Cindy, you might chat if you are, just so that I know that. But we actually did a video of them talking, and it's actually me interviewing them about collaborative learning. And so we'd love, and Cindy is here. So let's play a little bit of this video of Bridget Griffin. She's at Northridge High School, and Cindy Greider, who also is one of our business leaders that's on here. And we'll play some of this video, and then we may let Cindy on here to talk just a little bit too.
We are now in our section of collaborative learning, and excited to have Bridget Griffin here from Northridge High School in Middlebury, Indiana, and Cindy Greider from Robert Weed. And they partnered through our HEA industry-infused roundtables and have had some amazing experiences over the years. And so we're excited to hear more about them and collaborative learning that happened.
So I am super excited. Got to work with Bridget in professional development for their project-based learning parts that they've done, and have also had the chance to get to know Cindy very well. We've actually traveled overseas and found that we both like gelato. So we have some commonalities there, and that's maybe the most important thing to think about is eating gelato. But anyway, I'll start with you, Cindy. What have you found and seen as your company's return on investment from being involved in work-based learning and project-based learning from the standpoint can be anecdotal or any data that you found?
Okay, so this is a really good question, Byron, and I often get asked this when we talk about our participation in work-based learning and working with the high schools. So anecdotally, the biggest thing that we get back really is the enriching our community. We have a community where we often lose students to go away to college and they don't come back. And so we want them to know what kinds of businesses and jobs exist in our own community, very heavy manufacturing community here in Elkhart. And so we want to expose them to not only just all these different kinds of jobs and opportunities, but businesses, and create a positive relationship between us and the business. So we worked really hard, Bridget and I, to really partner Robert Weed with all the students at Northridge. So they really felt a sense of something in their community, another business that they could link to while they were learning in the class. When you look at what it costs to brand, so when we partnered with Bridget and we made the products that the kids designed. And here's one of them for an example. We branded everything. So what we got from this branding with all the students and the parents in the classroom probably costs us less overall in our efforts in this project than one radio spot to advertise our company to the future pipeline and to future employees in our business. So the cost is very little for us, and the benefits are very rich. We get the partnerships, and when the students come and visit our facility and take field trips, all of our people get very excited to share what we do with the next generation. So our part as a business is tiny compared to the effort Bridget and the students put in, but it's very rewarding for us in so many ways.
So Bridget, let's continue the return on investment. What do you believe the return on investment to your students has been?
So I think doing any project where we can be connected with a business, the fact that it's more authentic to the kids, I have found, and I've done project-based learning with other companies. I taught math. I've primarily done it with Cindy and Robert Weed since I'm taught engineering. But what I find is that I'll start out thinking, here's some standards I would like to cover. And by the time we're done with a project, there's probably 3 times as many standards that have been covered that I didn't even dream about, really. And so the idea of interacting with adults in the community, understanding the opportunities, again, I think a big thing in our county is we want to retain talent, and that is not something that happens without exposing them to what opportunities there are. But the students just gain a confidence that they can do something real rather than just doing what the teacher wants them to do. So they end up, I think, much stronger, whether it's teamwork, communication skills, all of those things that it takes to interact. Because when the Robert Weed people come in and listen to our presentations, first of all, the kids are usually nervous, but they realize, okay, these adults are just people, but also there's an expectation that I've done my job, and I can't get away with, oh, I forgot I was due today. I mean, they have to have it done. So those real life skills are huge, I think, in the high school. Okay.
And those skills have come because of collaborative learning. And we just talked about in this section before this, the real world and real context of this. So the collaboration allows for that to happen. So my next question, and Cindy, this maybe goes to you and to Bridget, but how can those that are watching this, how do we operationalize making sure that that collaboration can happen so that those students can be working with adults, the students can be working with each other in teams, and they can be having those, and teachers can be learning from businesses learning from teachers, and that whole piece. How do we operationalize that?
I'm going to step back for just a moment before answering that, Byron, and say that the reason that Bridget and I got to know each other is because we have a network here in Elkhart, and we got to know, I actually met her husband first, who also works at Northridge, and through various organizations that we're both connected with. So we had a common purpose when we got together in the first place. So having that network, having her come into our facility, having us go into her school, so that we can bridge that communication gap that businesses and schools have. We think we speak the same language, and then we get together and we get sort of confused on what each other says sometimes. So the more time we spend with each other in the thing is, we've known from the beginning that we have the same purpose, that what we're trying to do works together. So to start with, having a network where teachers and businesses can get together is the first thing that we really need in order to put it together. I can't imagine Bridget trying to find a business to work with if she didn't have a connection. So I think the first thing to make this happen smoothly is to have a network.
We can't just expect for even our most aggressive teachers in businesses, we can't really expect them to make those connections all by themselves. I've heard you say, Cindy, before, gosh, I can't imagine how many phone calls you'd have to make to find the right company, right? So we really, one of the things that we really want our listeners to take away is that when possible, if you can have a group come together like Horizon Education Alliance and help to make those connections for the schools and the businesses, that really is a best practice.
Absolutely.
It is. Although I would like to add, when I did some of this early on, I did make some cold calls. I mean, one time it was just to a customer service website. I had an idea. It was a packaging company, and I was teaching geometry, and I wanted to do a packaging type project, and I got an answer in about 2 days, and they were thrilled to be able to do it. So the connections are nice, but I think also it just says to me that businesses are willing to help our young people and collaborate with teachers to help in that education. So I think you have to start with that positive note that as a teacher, I think there's a feeling of, I don't quite understand business and I'm a little intimidated. What I found is that businesses are equally intimidated because they're like, I haven't been in a classroom for 20 years. I don't know the terms, and it's like those things don't matter when you get together and you decide you're going to work for the best interest of the students. Like, you can bridge all those gaps.
Absolutely. And my experience with all the industry that I am associated with, all the companies I'm associated with, every one of them wants to participate in an activity like this as well. So there isn't that businesses don't want to participate. In fact, very much do want to participate. Making that right connection, getting that right person, that's the key.
So Bridget, what has collaborative learning looked like for your students in this project and working with Robert Weed?
So I think the first thing, so this past year we tried something different where we had 2 schools involved, and so there was a collaborative team of students that only could meet virtually, which back in last December seemed like a very out there thing to do. I feel like if we did this project this year, the kids would know everything to do virtually because that's become our life. But that was kind of a new thing for us. But also it's that we work together with employees at Robert Weed. So we met together at the beginning of the project. We spent a whole day here, and they were able to interact with employees. They were able to go out on the plant floor and look at the processes. So employees of Robert Weed took our students around. And then they're available, really. We had several emails that they could contact the employees if they had specific questions, or Cindy would help us, make those connections if we needed it. So then the collaboration with the adults in the workforce continued, because they had to do presentations at the end. And then Robert Weed went and made some of the products that our students designed and brought them back to school. Really, for some of them, it was their third visit at school with us. So not only did the students really collaborate with each other, but collaborating with the employees here at Robert Weed.
Incredible. So which then begs the next question, and this is for both of you. Would love to hear from both of you. What obstacles have you encountered along the way, and how have you overcome them? And how, for some of those obstacles, what can people watching this take away to make sure they don't have those obstacles show up?
So I think one obstacle is the fact that like in the classroom, you might feel like you have certain standards that you cover at certain times of the year. And that calendar may not match the calendar of the company you choose to work with. And even if you finally have kind of established a calendar, the fact that the company, this is not their top priority in terms of if there's an emergency or, all of a sudden they're working crazy overtime, that their business still has to come first. So I think from a teacher standpoint, what I've learned is to be flexible in all of those things, to have kind of a window of time to offer the company, but know that, okay, your start date might be delayed a week if the person who was going to come to your classroom can't make it. Or you have to push your presentations at the end off a little bit. So there's times I've done a project where maybe I've even started something different and then come back to the presentations. So I think just having a flexibility on the education side of it to work with the real life demands that the business has.
So I was going to say the same thing in reverse, is understanding the school's calendar. We're here all year long. We're here 8 to 5, 5 to 5, whatever it is, first shift, second shift. And I think that flexibility, understanding each other's needs and requirements and calendars is really important. And then also just the understanding each other's language, and keep at it. Working with Bridget has been amazing, because I'll say, well, can you be here at 10? I'm not thinking that's school time. That's just opening on my calendar. So, but she's like, well, this is my open time. And then she pops over here and she tours the facility. So understanding each other's language, being flexible with each other's calendars, and keep at it. Just keep talking, keep finding that common ground so you can make it work.
And I think one last thing is just every year it will get better. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like, you don't want to wait until you think it's completely perfect. I think one big thing with project-based learning is the teacher gives up a lot of control and doesn't know the outcome. And that's can be scary if you're a person who likes everything in a neat and tidy package. But I mean, from my experiences, the outcome is always way more than I could have imagined. Like, students will rise to the occasion because there's those authentic expectations. Like, they will do an awesome job. And at the same time, the project every year, I think it can get better. I think the first year, questions that the Robert Weed people came up with at the end of the project that they asked the students hadn't even considered, because we hadn't talked about it initially. Kind of like, hey, they were developing products, and it's kind of like, okay, go out into the marketplace and what's a comparable product? So that Robert Weed could help us say, well, that's something we could make and make some money with it, or it's, we can't make it as cheap as, John Doe down the street. And so I feel like each year will enrich the project a little more with those kind of expectations. But in general, it's like just jump in and do it, and the students are going to learn a lot.
Well, that is great advice, and this has been so great. But I'm going to let you both have the last word here. You can determine which one of you has the true last word. But I just want to ask for our listeners, because we've got listeners from all over the country. We've got listeners from outside of this country. So from a global perspective, what advice can you give to our listeners, maybe particularly to the ones that are thinking, boy, we really need to do some project-based learning and work-based learning, and we just haven't dove into that yet? What advice do you have for those that to make this be a very successful piece? And Bridget, you just touched on that a little bit of just, you got to do it, right? And you got to jump in and do it. But would love to give you two the last word here. And this has been a great time to talk, but would love to hear just some advice here at the end.
I'll give you the last word, so I'll
Thanks.
The very first thing is you've got to get in each other's spaces. We've got to go to the school. They've got to come into our space. When Bridget first came in, she said, I'll come in and visit. I just took her around and showed her everything. Her brain was figuring this out. I'm not a teacher, so I let her have that. And then she said, oh, we could work in this area. I said, great, we can make that happen. And the flexibility that you have to have, brainstorm, let it flow. You're not going to nail it the first time, but it'll be better, as Bridget said, than who even imagined. So after the projects were presented to us in our group at Robert, we did a little Shark Tank style kind of when we went out there. And our lead engineer stood up in front of the class and said, we're going to make your products that you designed. Okay. So that's where we came up with these products. We made exactly what they designed. We brought them back to them at the end of the school year. So being flexible, let it go how it's going to go, because it's going to be better than you ever imagined. And then my final word is create a partnership.
Awesome.
And I think, Byron, I would end with that same thing, is that partnership is so important. And we're obviously fortunate that we have Horizon Education Alliance and that they facilitate those partnerships, and they've been working on the partnerships for years before we even really started looking at project-based learning. But I think even if you don't have that, it's everybody in the community, you can find connections with people. And it doesn't matter if it's manufacturing or service industry or healthcare industry. You can find connections with people, and even if initially it's a project that's somewhat fabricated, but it's with an authentic audience. I think what we did with Robert Weed, it potentially could have opened the door to, like, our problem was they needed market beyond the RV industry. And, maybe nothing we've come up with really fits that completely, but there's not to say that the students couldn't come up with an idea that really does, that helps Robert Weed. So I think it's just the idea of going out and looking for those partnerships and developing them through whatever context you have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been great. Bridget, Cindy, I've appreciated this. This is great for our listeners. I'm sure they've gotten a lot out of that. So thank you very much for being a part of what I call learning together apart here, right? So maybe we can all be together having some gelato at some point, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, awesome. So if we can go back to our slide set, and would love to have Cindy, I know that you're on here, would love for you to take the mic for a second, and maybe there was something that you have to say that you thought of after we've played this again and after that interview. And I would love if anyone else wants to grab the mic and ask. We've got an actual business person on here who has worked with our school, would love to just allow for a little bit of discussion, real world here with our business. So I'll turn it, Cindy, to you first if you want to say if you've thought of something.
Byron, it looks in the chat like she had to step away for a minute.
Oh, wow. I did not notice that.
Yeah, she just threw that in there.
Okay. I am so sorry then. We will, then let's do this. Let's move to our next puzzle piece. And if she comes back on, we'll give a chance for that at the end for some discussion. So our last piece, and of course it says third, but our last piece is about feedback. And so if we can swap to the next piece here, or next slide, sorry. This is we have another video. Again, we had a little trouble scheduling some of our teachers able to be in person, but we have another video here where we've interviewed a teacher who really did some great work around feedback and really had some epiphanies. I'm excited for you to hear from her and what this really meant to her students and why this is so important. So if we could play this video, it is much shorter than the one prior to, and then we'll get into a little bit of discussion here.
She is an English teacher there who, today we have Aubrey Mosness with us here from Goshen High School. She is an English teacher there who implemented project-based learning in her classroom, had a lot of success, and Byron's going to talk with Aubrey, ask some questions, and just hear about that experience.
Aubrey, it had been so good to get to work with you and get to meet your students. Can you tell those on the line, because we've got people that are teachers, policymakers, school leaders. Can you give us some pointers on if a school wanted to be doing some project-based learning and really get some work-based learning in for their students? Tell us about what are the things that are necessary, what are those tangible things that they need to do to bring that into their school the way that you've been able to do that?
Well, I think there needs to be support for teachers and also support in deciding what they need to hold tight to and what they can let go of. That was a big thing for me. So I'm an English teacher and we do a lot of genre study, but I really had to think about like, what is the most important thing for my seniors? And it was that they leave my building with applicable skills. And I felt like that's what project-based learning helped with, applicable skills. The biggest piece of that was letting go of some organization for me. Like I think teachers were planners and maybe on the borderline of control freaks. And so not knowing what was going to happen and letting the project move organically was a piece that I had to become comfortable with, but in the end benefited my students. Other things that need to be in place for teachers besides support, and I think time is a critical piece, giving teachers the time they need for that professional development, and especially if you're going to continue to do like the industry infused project-based learning, time to meet with the industry to get to know the industry would be really important.
So you touched on the industry piece, and you obviously worked with a business on this project. And as we mentioned earlier in this webinar, we talked about how Horizon Education Alliance helped to set that up. But you worked with a business. What was the value from the student side of having a business to actually work with? We've talked about this real world and relevant piece. Can you speak to that as to what did you gain from working with an actual business?
A buy-in. Like they felt like what they were doing was authentic and real. And that transferred into things in class that, I mean, I don't know if they weren't necessarily authentic and real, but I mean, maybe. So like buy-in and ownership. What they took was ownership in their learning, so much so that when we went to do another project, they're like, oh, like when we did the thing with Avonmarsh, we decide what we're going to do with this. Yeah, this is yours. You decide what you're going to do with this. We did a project We read a book about gang life, and then did a case study on gangs in south side of Chicago. And then my students broke out and they came up with different ideas about how they could impact gangs in Goshen and how they can reach students. So that was how we took what we learned, that ownership piece, through the industry infused part, and took it to something that maybe wasn't necessarily industry infused. The other thing that was beneficial for them and that I loved to see was my students talking to other adults besides teachers. Like that, it was so great because they came up with interview questions. They interviewed the people at Avamarsh, and it was just so, I mean, those were practical skills that my students will need. We practiced introducing ourselves, saying your name, where you're from, and your purpose, looking someone in the eye when you talk to them. They gained really important skills that they'll use after graduation. So, and I think they bought it. Like at first, when we practiced it, they're like, Miss, nobody does this. And I'm like, everybody does this. Not shaking hands anymore, but everybody used to do this like all the time. Everybody introduces themselves in the professional world. So they gained a lot of skills for their life after graduation.
Awesome. And so that buy-in piece and the students really becoming so involved, I'm going to quote you. I've got a couple of quotes that you know that I actually blogged about you because you inspired me during our professional development we were doing. I think some light bulbs came on for you, or some epiphany moments, if you will, that were wowful for me. One thing that you said was, I have felt the transition from me doing most of the work to the students doing most of the work. At first, I was a little uncomfortable because I felt like I wasn't doing much. But then I realized how much the students were getting out of it. And then you had, and I'm going to quote you one more time, and then I want you to reflect on those comments and where you've come as an educator. The last thing you said when you were presenting, and the picture that we have in the PowerPoint is your students actually presenting to a group of adults, which we also know is a best practice. You said, when I give my students too much information, too much guidance, I am taking away opportunities for their learning. And I said that was a drop the mic moment. I hope you remember saying that. Can you reflect on those statements and your journey and where you think you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. That was my biggest learning. And even as we start the school year with that, it's a struggle for me, right? Because like we're working to implement best practices and behaviors for learning and things like that. But what I need to get comfortable is watching students struggle, because if they don't live in the struggle and find their way out of the struggle, they're going to count on someone else for the rest of their lives to help them deal with struggle. And so that would be like maybe an expansion of my understanding or learning, when if I do too much work for them, I'm taking away from their learning. It's that I need to be comfortable with watching them struggle. Support them, like don't let them fail outright repeatedly over and over again. Help them through the struggle, but let them struggle. So that would probably be my further reflection upon those statements.
So Aubrey, that was such great information. And so we talked about making schoolwork look like real work. And so when we talk about feedback, clearly your students have had a chance to work with adults in this project. They've worked with a business. What's feedback to the student look like? What's it look like when they've had that struggle? They're going through the process of creation. What's that look like for you?
Well, they get feedback from multiple sources, from their peers, from myself, and then from the business itself. Feedback they would get from their peers would be, when we wrote business letters, they would share their letters and get ideas from each other. They really struggled with coming up with how, and Sarah, I think you were there, how to start their first line. And so we talked about how we can figure out how to write those. That was like my best day of teaching ever. Anyway, and they got feedback from me, and very timely feedback, because we were working together. I mean, it wasn't just like they were working and they submitted and I gave them feedback. I mean, it was very timely feedback. As they worked, I gave them feedback. And then feedback from the business felt really good to them when they presented. So they came up with a visual representation for what the design might look like. And each student presented to the business, to about 4 representatives from the business. And then they had their PowerPoint up and the business people came and sat by them and they could go into more detail. They got a lot of positive feedback. I have never seen my students more nervous and more confident. So super nervous at the beginning, but how great that they could work through their nerves and present in a professional manner. I was so happy for them. Present in a professional manner and then feel so confident afterward.
So one last piece to the feedback piece of this. Would you also believe that, I believe that when we do things like project-based learning and you're working with your students on projects, that you are actually being developed at the same time from a feedback standpoint. Would you agree with that? And would you comment on that?
Absolutely. I'm sorry. Can you say that one more time? Because my son was walking in and talking to me.
Not an issue. This is real life, right? And we're able to do this. What would you say the professional development? Would you say that having worked with a company, watching your students go through this, that this has also been real-time professional development for you as you've worked with the other adults that you've worked with?
Oh, absolutely. I think especially as a high school teacher, we get really focused on our content area, right? Like English, literature, writing, reading, listening, speaking. But when I talked to the professional world, like the world that my students are going to enter after they leave my building, their focus was on thinking, problem solving, and communication. And so it helped me rethink about what my focus needs to be on as an English teacher, because like I am not just responsible for reading, writing, listening, and speaking skills. I'm also responsible for those thinking and problem solving skills. And so that's been the change in focus.
Awesome.
And the PD.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. This has been very enlightening. We appreciate your time. And I think everyone on here can see that the things that you've talked about are all things that can be done, whether we're in person, virtual right now in some cases, or even blended, that we can still do project-based learning with the things that you've talked about with this. So we really appreciate, Aubrey, you taking time. I know that I've been inspired by the work that you've been doing. So thanks for spending time doing this with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Darn, I said I was not going to start with being muted, but I've also continued to say if I had $1 for every time I've done that, I'd be a very, very rich man. But I would love to go back and just open up here for a few minutes. I know there were some questions, and so Sarah, if you want to pop in, if there aren't any that come over the microphone, and maybe answer some of those that came in. And also, I know we have Cindy, so I'm going to go back to Cindy and have Cindy maybe reflect on some of the things that she had said in the video, if there are other thoughts that have come to mind. Or I would love if anybody would want to grab a microphone and ask a question of one of our actual employers from the project that we've been doing. So I'm going to leave this a little bit open mic here for just a minute and see if anybody would love to do that. Pause just to have a quick discussion.
I can share a little bit. There was I think we answered most of the questions, but one that came up was about background checks. So that's just like, it depends on the school and how they do it and the teachers. So when I was partnered with a business, when I was a teacher, I just had to let my secretary know that I was having visitors come, and she gave me background checks. I got it filled out by the business and she ran them. And then I saw Cindy from Robert Weed commented that they just provided that information to the school. So it depends on if that goes through your school secretaries or through the admin building. But yes, it is important that that happens before there's that interaction with the business.
And, you know, even from a state policy standpoint, we've tried to really address those kinds of things to where there aren't the obstacles of being able to do these things. And there's some great tools available. For example, Raptor is one that's a brand name of, you know, you give them your driver's license when you come into a school or working with them, and it actually does the background checks right there. So so therefore and you're exactly right. Some background checks don't specifically check for contact with children. You've got to have that set up the exact right way for your particular school and the way that you do that. But yes, and thank you for telling about Raptor you have in there. Raptor's one that I'm very, very familiar with and has worked well. And the thing I also like about Raptor is I throw this in here as a former school administrator, is that it uses the driver's license, but you also have some workarounds, because we also know in many settings we have people without driver's licenses, and I never wanted to make it be uncomfortable for that. So that's one reason why I like that particular system. Did I see Cindy trying to get back on? Cindy, did you have comments?
Not really, just that I think that's just another example of something that businesses are not going to think about. We don't think about running background checks before people come in and visit us. So if teachers can remember to share these sort of things with us, that's really helpful. Past periods, timing, all those kinds of things. We just don't work in the same worlds.
So really, it continues to come down to having the conversations, and we all have the same purpose, but we've got to be talking the same language and talking about the same things, right?
Right. It's really easy. You just have to enlighten us a little bit, because it's been a while since we've been in that environment. But the same goes for in reverse. But so Bridget and I, we just talk, and she just tells me these things, and then I tell her the things that she needs to know, and then it goes great.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I'm not seeing any other questions in here. If we could skip to the last slide, please. Next one. And I would just love to really bring this together back again to the point that what we're really trying to do is end up with motivated students, because our students are our primary goal here, and doing what's best for them, helping them to be motivated. We showed this particular graph earlier in the presentation, and we want to get to that far upper right-hand quadrant where we've got students being creative, innovative, and doing problem solving. And if we can get them there, they'll be super motivated. You heard this from the teachers that were on, and the things that have been done. You've heard this from the businesses that have been on as well. And so that's what mastering those corner pieces get us. And so I would just like to open it up one more time to anyone who has questions or anything that you'd like to share from a discussion standpoint of just what mastering these corner pieces can mean, and maybe anything that you've done that you'd like to share if you're on this webinar that you've done to get students to that upper quadrant. Do we have anyone who would like to share out before we close out here? Okay, I'm not seeing any or hearing any. So with that, I just want to say on behalf of this Indiana-based team, I sound like a flight attendant here, from this Indiana-based team, that we have enjoyed being with you this afternoon, sharing out a little bit of what we've been doing. And again, that best practice of having someone help us make those connections, help to make the connection between business and industry and our schools, and then give the students that real world experience that they can have with a business. So with that, Natalie, I'm going to turn it back to you. I know you've got some things to close out.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wow, what a great presentation. Please join me in thanking our presenters for sharing such wonderful real-world knowledge and insights and expertise on how to get started with authentic, deep, real-world project-based learning. It was tremendous. If you have just 1 minute, we have a quick 3-question survey and we'd love your feedback. We'll drop that link in the chat box for you in just a second. And as a reminder, today's session was recorded and it will be archived on our website, and we'll send you all a follow-up email in the coming days, and you'll be able to refer back to any portions of this webinar or the slide deck that might be helpful to you. And we do hope that you'll consider joining us for future webinars as well. We have a lot more listed on our website, but on this slide, there's a snapshot of upcoming webinars over the next month or so that you can sign up for, register, and attend free of charge. So we hope to see you there. Lastly, we also hope that you will join us at the Aurora Institute Symposium this year, which will be virtual and held on October 26th through the 28th. You can find out more information there on our website. And of course, please feel free to reach out to us with any questions or ways that we might be helpful to you in the work that you're leading. Again, Dr. Byron Ernest, Lauren, Bailey, Sarah Kuntz, Sabrina, and the students who joined you, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks to everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.